Adobe Illustrator has this brand new pattern maker that is really amazing, but I want to show you how we used to have to make patterns to kind of put it all in perspective. Now you can create patterns to use in your artwork from any type of art. So for instance, if you wanted to make a dot pattern, all you need to do is select your artwork and drag it into the swatches panel. Just by doing that, you've created a new pattern that you can then use to fill an object. So let's say I wanted to fill this rectangle with the pattern you just created. You would select the rectangle and select your pattern. Now, strokes can also support patterns if they're thick enough. So if we wanted to, we can toggle that. So now we have a black fill and a bubbly dot pattern. I'm going to switch those back to the way they were and put my stroke back to 1. Now, this pattern is really tight. All of the circles are touching on top, bottom, left, and right. And if you wanted to have a little bit of breathing room around the circles, you would need to create a larger space around your pattern before dragging it into the swatches. So one way to do that, and I'm just going to reset the swatches and then get rid of the stroke and get rid of the fill, and then grab a rectangle tool, holding down my shift key to constrain, and draw a shape around my dot. So that shape has no stroke, no fill, and I'm actually going to grab both of those and then use my align tools so that the circle is right in the center of that dot. And now I'll drag that into my swatches panel. Now I have a new dot pattern, so I can select this shape and apply that new pattern to that shape. There's my dot pattern with a little bit of space around it. So if you want to increase the space, you would just increase the size of that invisible shape behind your pattern. So anything can be a pattern. So we could grab these little straight lines here and drop that into the panel, and then grab our object and have it fill that object. We could make a pattern from a little kitty cat, like so, and fill our object with kitties. And when you have an object that has a pattern fill, if you hold down your tilde key, you know that key? It's right to the left of your number 1 at the top of your keyboard. If you hold down the tilde key, you can actually click and drag, and when you do that, the object stays in place, but the pattern is sort of reset inside the object. So if I wanted to try and get the kitties to start right up at the top, I would just have to hold down my tilde key and nudge it ever so slightly until I can get the starting point in position. You know, maybe I want to then modify the size of my shape so I have 2 nice clean rows of kitties like that. I'm going to undo, undo. So that's a keyboard shortcut. The tilde key will allow you to reposition the pattern inside a selected object. But not only that, you can use any of the transformation tools to modify your object. So let's put a thicker stroke back on the selected shape, and we'll go to the rotate tool. Now double click the tool to bring up the tools dialog box, because here's where these options come into play. You have the option to transform the object while the pattern stays the way it was, or you can transform the pattern and the object stays where it was, or you can transform both at the same time. So if you just wanted to modify the pattern, once you select that option, you could then set the angle within the selected object. Once you have everything the way you like it, you can click OK, or even make a copy so that it throws, this is pretty crazy, it throws another copy of the fill with that pattern onto the shape. So I'm going to undo that for a second, and let's take a look at these other options. The reflect tool, let's double click to open up the reflect dialog box. Again, we can transform the object. Let's choose this way, or both, either way, like so. Maybe we can throw an angle on there. And then when you have everything the way you like it, just click OK. Other options are to scale. So you can scale it uniformly or non-uniformly. You can scale your strokes and effects. You can transform the object or transform the pattern. So maybe we want to leave everything the way it is, but not transform the object, but uniformly scale the cat pattern down to 25%, something like that. So now we have a zillion kitties. And then if you were to go create another object using that same fill, that transformation will be retained for any future objects. To clear that transformation, all you need to do is fill the object with another color, and then you can reset that pattern within the dialog box by selecting that pattern again. Let's keep talking about the other transformations. We did scale. Now we'll do shear. And as you would expect, you can set the shear angle or change the horizontal or vertical axis or any of these options down here. And when you have everything the way you like, just click OK. So this is the old way of doing things. And before I show you the new way, I just want to mention that any of the patterns that you see in the swatches panel can be used and reused. So for instance, I had created a pattern here with some stars. So if I want to edit the pattern, I can drag it and drop it onto my artboard. There it is. So let's say I want to change the background color or change the star color. I'll do both. So we'll make it pink and we'll make the star orange. No, that's not contrast enough. Let's do yellow and blue or something like that. Then we could drag that back onto our swatches and have it ready for use. So for this one, starting off like this, it's remembering the transformation, and when we paint in this one, it takes on the new color. If we select this box, which didn't have any transformations applied to it, clicking on the first star, the pattern comes in as it was created, just like this one. So let's delete a couple of things here, and we'll fill that with some simple stars. Actually, we'll go back to our dots, like so. So now let's talk about the new way of making patterns, and I think this might just blow your mind. So we'll start with a dot, but this time let's get rid of that background and we'll make it a different color. How about this color here, or a brighter pink? When you're ready to work with the new pattern maker, select your object and go to the Object menu, choose Pattern, Make. It gives you this dialog box that says that your new pattern has been added to the swatches panel, and any changes that you make while in pattern editing mode will be applied to the swatch upon exit. Once you understand that conceptually, and you don't need to be reminded of it anymore, you can click that box and it won't appear anymore. So here is the panel that goes along with that swatch. Now you can see that swatch is kind of like that first red pattern, where there's hardly any breathing room around it. And what's really awesome about the pattern maker is it tiles your original artwork and shows you a preview of how the pattern would look. You can give your pattern a name. You can give your pattern a tile type. So let's call this Sue's dot. And then we could choose the type here. There's grid. There's brick by row, and you can choose the brick offset number. Brick by column, and you could choose the offset here as well. Hex by column. Hex by row. So let's go back to the grid. And then you can specify the width and height. If you want them to constrain proportionately, click the link. So then if we wanted to go something like 45, both of them should change at the same time. And look how it's added space around the circle. So if we want even more space, let's say we want to go up to 65, all you have to do is plug it in one place. Let's see what 55 looks like. Actually, I think I like 45, like that. So you could also say move tile with art or size tile to art. And those will give you different looks. I'm going to go back to the way it was at 45. And then there's horizontal and vertical spacing, and these options will toggle themselves on and off based on the other selections that you make in the dialog box. Now, if you had your object overlapping, these overlap buttons would come into play. And if you put your cursor on top, you'll see that this would be overlapping left in front or overlapping right in front, top in front, and bottom in front. As far as how many objects you'll see in the grid, you can choose the number of copies here. And this is really wonderful because if you're creating patterns for a particular customer or project, you're usually told in advance what size pattern that you need to create before you hand off your artwork to your client. And so knowing this will assist you in making sure that your object will be able to fill the space uniformly and cleanly. You could dim the copies to 70% or some other measurement, and whether or not you want to show the tile edges. I like to see where the edges are. I think it helps. And here's show swatch bounds. We're not seeing anything here. When you have everything the way you like it, you could click this button here to toggle on the tile tool. This is actually one more thing that I wanted to show you. With this option on, you can modify the object's bounding box. So if you wanted to, make it look like column rows or something like that, you can come back in here and change it at any time. Now you're back into regular view, and upon saving or exiting the pattern option dialog box, you can save that pattern. Now here's some options in this bar at the top. You could save a copy so it would keep your original in place and make a copy with the duplicate changes. You could say you're done, or you could say forget it. I don't want to keep that. Let's go back. And then when you're finished clicking on one of these, you can go back out of this mini isolation mode. So let's say save a copy, and we'll give this a name, dots column, like so. And then you can see that new pattern has been added to the swatches panel, and now we can get out of that isolation mode. So what if you had something a little more complex like a cat? We could still do the same thing, object, pattern, make, and we could maybe this time modify the overlap by modifying the number of points here. So let's do something like 40 and see if that gets some overlapping going. So here's where you can switch the angle of the overlap, whether it's in front or in back. In this case, we just have overlapping happen on the horizontal plane. When you have everything you like, save a copy, click OK, exit out, and you're ready to start using your pattern on any selected shape. There's my cats, and I'm ready to go. Illustrator has a bunch of free pattern libraries that I encourage you to check out and play around with. You can access the pattern libraries through the Swatches Panel Library button, and you just need to go to the Patterns section and choose any of these options. There's Basic Graphics, Dots, Lines, and Textures. There's Decorative, Legacy, and Vonster patterns, which are new, and Nature, Animal Skins, and Foliage. So let's check out that new one. These patterns open up in a floating dialog box, and anytime you apply any one of them to your selected object, that particular pattern swatch is added to your swatches panel. Just click on a few here. We like that one. Now, let's say you really wanted to use this pattern but change the colors. You could drag that onto the artboard. Now look how intricate that is. You could modify the colors and then go back into the pattern maker. So let's do that. Let's go in here and select this object and go to the select menu and choose same fill color. And we'll change all of the yellows to a green. And then we'll select that whole thing. Let's see, I might have to move everything off or deselect my cat. That might be tricky. Deselect this, deselect that. I don't know if there's anything else under here, but we'll presume that there's not. Oh wait, there's my lined pattern. Okay, I think we're good. And now we can go into the pattern maker and try to make a pattern from this shape. So now you can see how it's tiling. It's huge. So we might want to bring the size down quite a bit. Let's try 50 and 50 and see what we get. So now that's a big mess. So apparently it needed to be quite that large. So I'm just going to cancel out of here. But if you see artwork that you like, you can use it for your own purposes and then modify the colors and then bring it back into the pattern maker and use it over and over and over again. So let's take a look at another one before we exit out of this area. So patterns, nature, let's look at some animal skins. So here is this object selected, and we could take a look at these. So there's alligator and cheetah, elephant, there's zebra. And again, anytime we click on any of these, they're automatically added to our swatches so that we can reuse it at any time. It looks like those panels were docked into my dock accidentally. I'm just going to close those up. I want to switch now to talking about working with gradients. And I have two boxes here, and I want to grab both of them and fill them with a gradient. You have several default preset gradients in your swatches panel. So like this one right here is a linear gradient. Actually, let's make that one linear and we'll make this one radial so you can see how they fill the shape. So once you have a gradient filling an object, you don't have to stick with the way it looks, its orientation. You can modify the orientation as well as modify the gradient itself. If you want to modify the orientation, you will click on the object and grab your gradient tool, and you'll notice that this bar appears across the object, and that determines the flow or orientation or direction of your gradient. So if I wanted it to go from left to right, the length of the gradient and the position of the gradient bar will determine how and where the object flows. So you can click and drag short, click and drag long, and the length will determine the blend and the flow. Now notice too that there are little markers here, a little white marker and a little gray-black marker. And also notice that you can put your cursor on the end to reposition it. If you wanted to change the colors of the markers on your gradient, you could double-click and this brings up a little floating panel with color on it. So then this is the color that it is now. If you wanted to, you can change it to another color. So you could do that with this guy right here. Just double click on it. And notice that it's giving me the CMYK sliders. It's because we're in a CMYK document. If I wanted to use a particular color from my swatches panel, I could click here and then it would show me all of the swatches. And you could toggle back and forth between CMYK and swatches view at any time. Now you could also create your own gradients at any time or modify the existing selected gradient through the gradient panel. Now the gradient panel will show you a preview of the selected gradient, and here's the little thumbnail view, and if you click on it you can see all of the thumbnails of the gradients inside the swatches panel. You can also modify the type of gradient that your selection is using. So right now this one is using a linear gradient, but you could switch to radial, which is kind of like this other one. So let's switch back to linear. Here you could toggle the stroke and the fill if you wanted to. And if you wanted to specify a particular angle, you can type it in or choose any of these presets. And sometimes having an exact preset is more precise and easier to grab than trying to adjust this to any particular angle by hand. And then here's your markers for the gradient. As we did before on the bar in live editing mode, you can also edit colors here as well. So it's really just a duplicate of what you see here, or what you see here is a duplicate of what's here in the panel. If you want to add a color to your gradient, just click along the bottom edge and notice how your cursor gets a plus sign along the bottom edge. Click anywhere and you'll add a new marker. The new marker can then be double clicked to fill with any desired color. If you decide you don't want that color, you can drag it away from the bar and it will disappear. So you might want a few different colors and play around with the different marker colors like so. And maybe this one I want to make it a little more greenish like so. The markers themselves can be shifted along the gradient blend, and these little diamonds on top will determine where one color shifts to another. Now, typically they're right between any two colors, but you can modify it towards one or the other marker. And again, as I said, if you wanted to remove any, just click and drag them off the slider and you'll append the colors shown in your gradient. You could even modify the opacity of any marker. So let's say I wanted to modify the opacity of that one slider, then I can shift it down like to 50%. So it's actually fading into transparency. And if I had an object behind it, you would be able to see through it. I'm going to put it back to 100%. And the location, you can also play around with this. This just modifies the position of the selected marker. So that one's selected and it moved it in to 70% mark, presuming this whole thing represents a scale of 1 to 100. Let's put it back at 100. Let's shift over here. Now, if we were working with a radial gradient, you'll see here our selected objects has the radial gradient with the black stroke. You can modify the angle like you could before, although you may not be able to see any change because of the way the gradient is filling the object space. You could also modify the aspect ratio of your radial And notice how that when I made it much bigger, it almost looks like a curved shape. It looks like there's like a light source and we're seeing just the curved dome top of it. Let me put that back to 100. You could also play around with the gradient sliders, add colors as often as you need. Again, change the opacity and the location. Now, if you had created a blend and you wanted to save it and it were different than what was already there. So let's say we want to change it from white to this color blue, and we want to save that. All we would need to do is drag it and drop it into our swatches panel. And now we can use that again and again and again at any time. Or maybe we don't want it to be radial, or actually let's move the marker over here. Maybe we want it to be more like that. This is brand new gradient, so we can drag that one in as well. So now we have two separate gradients based on one slider's look and feel. There are a bunch of free gradients that come with Illustrator. Again, those are accessible through the Swatches Library panel under the Gradients heading. And look how many there are. There's a ton. So you have brights, color, harmonies, earth tones, foliage, fruits and vegetables. That's one of my all-time favorites for some reason. Anyway, fruits and vegetables has all these special different gradients. And if you hover on top, you'll see there's eggplant, there's mangosteen. And as you add these, they're added to your swatches panel, but you could go back in and adjust them at any time if you wanted. Let's put that up there. Now, what if you had a gradient filling a space like a bunch of letters? Now, I have already converted all of these into outlines and ungrouped them. So if we have selected all of them and we wanted to apply a gradient to them all at once, each separate shape will have the gradient applied to it. You can, however, control how the gradient fills your shape by using the gradient tool on top. So if you do what I just did, selecting all of the letter shapes, apply the gradient, then grab the gradient tool, each shape gets its own little bar, its little gradient marker to control it. You can override that by dragging across the letter shapes in any direction. I'll hold down my shift key to constrain. So now we're having a gradient blend from one side to the other, and you could also go from top to bottom like so. So that's another way of controlling the gradients on your artboard. Let's shift now and look at a couple other things. There's a feature called the blend tool. Let's get rid of that right now. The blend tool that will actually create blends from two or more shapes. There's a special tool called the blend tool, and it will allow you to click on one and then click on another shape to create a blend. So black to black isn't going to be that dramatic, but let me show you how it works. So you click on the first object and then click on the second object, and you'll see that there's a blend happening. It's stepping from shape and distance from small to large. I'm going to undo that and change the color of the second one. Let's change the color of the first one while we're at it. And if you wanted to, you could even select both objects. You don't have to use that blend tool. You can go to the object menu, choose blend, make, and then you have a really smooth transition from one color to the next. There are some blend tool options. You can access them by double-clicking on the blend tool or going to the object blend options in the object menu. And the blend options dialog box has a bunch of different settings. You can choose the spacing as well as the orientation. Now we have a straight path, so you're not going to see any change on the orientation. I'll show you that in just a minute. But the spacing is something that could really control how you see the blend. Right now it's set to smooth color, which is probably over 200, maybe 300 different steps between the original and the final box. So this guy here and this guy here. Now notice how the center point of each original shape is connected by a path. That path is called the spine of the blend. And you can modify the path, and I'll show you that in just a sec. So right now it's smooth color. You could also say, show me specified steps. So I was pretty close in my guess, 254. If you want to see only 100 steps, just plug that number in. I didn't see much of a change there, so we'll go a little bit lower. How about 45? We're still seeing quite a few. Let's bring it down to 20. There we go. Now we can start to see it. Sometimes you may need to toggle the preview on and off. Normally you can click in the gray area to accept the transformation change in any dialog box. So now we can see the stepped colors, all of the individual pieces that are being stacked on top of one another along the way to create this blend. The third option is to choose a specified distance, where you can choose the number of points. So if we brought it down to something like 1, it's very little space between the individual pieces. But if we took it up to something like 50, toggle that off, now you can see the space between the different pieces in this blend. Let's go back to Smooth Color and click OK, and I'll show you how to modify the spine of a blend. You'll grab your pencil tool and make sure that the blend object is selected. And what you'll need to do is start from the center point of one object and try to end on the center point of the other. So here we're going to click and drag like so. And you'll notice how the complete shape of the blend totally transformed. What's even more amazing is that if you click on your direct selection tool, you can activate the shapes and the spine, and you could come in and modify the object as well as the path, and then move around the individual pieces of the path to create some really unique shapes. Let's move that guy down. And so let's say with this shape, I wanted to not only move it, but also adjust the shape of it like so. So now you can see like the whole look and feel of this object changed. And if we want to see a little bit more about what's going on with it, like reduce the number of steps, we'll double click on the blend tool and change it to either specified steps or specified distance so that we can see what's going on, all the individual pieces. Now, when you have a blend, you can expand it into individual pieces in case you needed something that was somewhere between this shape and that shape, or something in between along this funky path. Under the Object menu, you can choose Expand, and that will ask you if you want to expand the stroke or fill. In this case, we just have a fill, no stroke, but we could still say OK. And then it will give us all of these individual pieces which are grouped together. You could then ungroup and then go in and grab the one piece that you happen to need, or the several individual pieces that you wanted to work with. Let me undo a couple of steps to get that back to the way it was before I modified the spine. There we go. What's even more incredible about creating blends with the blend tool is that you can go from live editable type to shape. So here is live editable type, the letter A, and there's a star. So we can grab our blend tool and click on the A, and then click on the star, and we have a blend taking place. Now if you want to modify what you're seeing, you click on the preview, and actually let's do this. Let's change the arc of the spine, and then we'll modify a couple of the features, like go down to specified steps and choose 20, toggling off the preview, and then we can change the orientation. So right now it's aligning to the page so that the star's bottom and the letter A's bottom are parallel to the bottom of the page. But you could also say align it to the path, and that shifts how the objects are falling and orienting along the path. So keep that in mind when you're combining shapes. Another thing you can do, let's move up here, is you can do a shape on top of a shape. So let's grab that blend tool again and click on the one shape and then click on the second shape, and you have a nice smooth blend. And if you deselect, you can see that it's almost like there's this light source really close to the object, and it gives us this beautiful dimensionality. What's more, that white object can be repositioned anywhere on the shape and could even be scaled up or down if you wanted to. And then with the blend tool, you can go in and modify, say, specified steps or specified distance. Maybe you want to make it this more 70s groovy banding effect. You could then reposition that center circle towards the middle of the shape to get this really amazing hypnotic look and feel. Let's go back to the blend tool and talk about rotations, because where you click on your shapes can determine whether or not the shape will rotate in space. So if I were to click here on the bottom of the blue rectangle and here on the bottom of the yellow, we're getting specified steps from one to the next. But if I were to do something like, let me release that here, click here at the bottom left of the pink, and then go to the top of the purple, you'll see that that shape is not only transforming in color, but it's transforming in space and twisting around as it gets from point A to point B. So you can create blends from multiple objects. So we have a star, and there's another star, but there's another star, and there's another star. So you can add objects and subtract objects from the blend at any time and modify the paths. You could also blend just paths from one path to the next. So let's grab the blend tool one more time and click on that guy and then click on this guy. And you have this nice simple blend. Now, if we want to make that even smoother, we'll just switch from specified steps to smooth color, show a preview. Look at that. It's beautiful, and it's following the shape of my opening and closing curve paths. Now, the last thing I want to show you is working with symbols. Symbols can also be used on paths. I've dragged out two symbols from the Symbols panel, which we'll talk about in a later lesson. But here you have a feather. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see this. A little feather and a bigger feather, and a path that's connecting both of them. In fact, symbols happen to have a center point. And if you were to drag that center point on top of a path, you'll feel that it sort of snaps into place. So you can draw your own path and then work with symbols. That one's right on the tip of that one. And I'll grab all of these and do Object, Blend, Make. And then we have all of these individual shapes blending along that path. What's more, once the path is established, you can redraw it if you like. You could also modify any of the individual symbols with your white arrow and grab one of the symbol instances. You could then use like the rotate tool to rotate it. And notice as it's rotating in space, the rest of the symbols on the path are also rotating.